Good evening. If everyone would have their seats, we're going to get started. Thank you. Good evening. It is 6:00 p.m. on Tuesday, October 17th. Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting of the Peoria City Council to order. I'd also like to welcome everyone that's watching on YouTube, City of Peoria TV, and everyone who's present in our council chambers. Madam Clerk, council mics are open. Please call the roll.
Mayor Ali. Councilmember Allen.
Present.
Councilmember Sear.
Here.
Councilmember Gordon Young.
Present.
Councilmember Graham.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Euler.
Here.
Councilmember Riggenbach. Councilmember Velpula.
Present.
And Councilmember Vespa.
Here.
You have a quorum present, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Everyone, please join me and stand for a moment of silent prayer or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just wanted to point out that this is a special meeting of the Peoria City Council regarding the 2024-2025 biennial budget held this Tuesday, October 17th at 6 o'clock. We do have several additional calendar dates that are scheduled for special meetings. Next week is our regular council meeting on Tuesday, October 24th, but that following Tuesday, and we're back to October 31st, Tuesday, October 31st. We couldn't really get agreement on another date that week that everybody could be available. So we are scheduled for Tuesday, October 31st for another scheduled budget meeting, and then that following Tuesday, November 7th, another special meeting regarding the budget. Madam Clerk?
23-342 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director Comptroller with a request to approve the estimate of taxes to be levied in the amount of $29,940,599 at a rate of $1.3534 pursuant to 35 ILCS 200/18-60.
Thank you. Will this be corporate counsel or city manager?
This is going to be our Finance Director, Karate, who's going to
Okay.
do that.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. The estimate of taxes in front of you tonight constitutes a 7% increase to the tax extension. What I want to point out very clearly in this is not an increase to the rate. This is capturing the increased value of the community, which is estimated to be at 7% this coming year. At that 7% increase, it would require a truth and taxation hearing, which we would hold at a later date. And then just lastly with this, just a reminder that this is the levy estimate being put on the table for the 20-day notice requirement. This is not binding to City Council in terms of their final decision. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Councilmember Sear?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Move to approve request.
Seconded by Councilmember Velpula. Discussion. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Craddy, how much flexibility in time do we have to meet all the proper deadlines on this?
We have to have the truth in taxation notice would need to be in the paper. I believe it's at a minimum, and I would probably defer to Corporation Counsel. I believe at least a minimum of 7 days prior to the hearing. So we have some time on that item to make that decision if council wanted to make a change to the levy.
I'd like to have a discussion about about the levy. We have time. I can defer that, or defer my discussion. But as long as we are not committing ourselves at this point, then I'm fine.
Manager, did
Thank
you want to comment?
We fully anticipate that there would be a discussion over the levy as we got into the budget deliberations. And, you know, certainly we, as the staff, are prepared this evening as we get into the budget presentation to talk about the significant reasons why we're recommending this levy as it stands.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Welcome. Any additional discussion? Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
23-343 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director Comptroller with a request to hold a discussion on the 2024-2025 biennial budget.
Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Once again, I'm going to turn the floor over to Director Craddy.
Absolutely. In your packet was a copy of the presentation that I will run through this evening with council. I got it. You got to hit the on button. That's on me. Just kind of as an overarching conversation, I want to talk a little bit about the economy broadly as well as the economy in Peoria. I think that drives the decision-making that the staff have with how we're putting the budget together and the discussions with council. So the economists estimate U.S. GDP growth will be about 0.9% in 2024. That is obviously substantially down from what it has been the last few years. The belief by most economists is that a lot of the efforts that the Fed has taken to date to combat inflation is working. It's still not back to reaching levels of normal inflation, but some of those efforts are working to keep inflation in check. It's still unclear whether or not there will be, and I know people don't like using the word and having a discussion on recession. It feels like a lot of the larger pressure towards a recession is abating. That we're looking more at maybe some small pullback, some soft landing, but not anything that's on the offing of like an 08 or those kind of levels of a recession. So the budget that we have in front of you was built based off that assumption of potentially a small pullback, but not anything that is catastrophic like some of the past recessions that we've seen. In terms of unemployment, holistically across the nation is still at a moderate level. We're looking at 3.8% on national unemployment, 5.3% on state unemployment. The city of Peoria, the region, has increased from 6.2% to 6.8%. I can't speak exactly to why that is. It could be a timing in the reporting, but the numbers are up slightly year over year on unemployment within the city. Some of the high-level summary of the budget, we anticipate revenues this coming year of $29.7 million. That is a decline of about $291.7 million. Thank you.
Thank you.
Down about 6.22%. That includes $10.3 million in fiscal recovery funds. Just as a reminder, the city received $47 million in fiscal recovery funds from the U.S. Treasury. We only book receipt of those revenues as we're expending those dollars, so there will be those revenues in this coming year for that $10.3 million. In terms of the operational expenditures, we're at $198.9 million. That's down 4.22%, and that is primarily because we are seeing, as we are getting into the last year of our fiscal recovery spending, we're seeing a reduction in our spending. In terms of capital, we have a budget in front of you that has $101.4 million in capital. That is a 35% year-over-year increase. Some of the highlights include the CSO Year 3 projects, just the continued strong state and federal grant dollars that the city continues to receive for its projects, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, as well as for roads and drainage projects. In terms of debt, our debt cost next year is $21.6 million. That's down 3.8%. That's to meet our current debt requirements, and we'll talk about what the debt picture looks like in a future slide. In terms of 2023 budget highlights, I kind of want to give you a high-level overview of where we anticipate the budget being. We continue to see strong revenue growth, specifically looking at things like our sales tax numbers. We continue to see those consumer-type revenues continue to be high. We'll talk about those on a separate slide, as well as our state sources. We continue to see strong state sales tax numbers. We continue to see strong state income tax numbers. We are seeing some softening in personal property replacement tax receipts. We'll talk about in a future slide. But we are seeing strong revenue growth. And as I said, we're continuing to see federal and state grants continue to be strong. The 2023 was the first year of the SAFER grant for the fire department. We have received close to $8 million in violence prevention grants for the police department. That will be part in this year and part in 2024. The ARP funds for small businesses and neighborhoods, next year will be the last year of those dollars. And just a lot of our capital grants, whether it be road projects or infrastructure projects, we continue to receive a strong amount of grant opportunities. We do anticipate expenses to be on track with budget. Based off of the amended budget, we have had some ebbs and flows this year as we've gotten grant dollars in, or things like the debt issuance on behalf of the Civic Center, but we are still on pace to be within the kind of revised budget. We do have within this budget, within 2023, we do have a recommendation to City Council to have an early repayment of a debt issuance. A few years back, the city had a loan from the county for the intersection at Willow Knolls. We are at a position now that we would like to go ahead and repay that early. It's about $1.8 million, and it will free up about $500,000 annually over the coming years for within local motor fuel tax for other road projects. So we feel the timing is right with the financial positions the city is in this year to go ahead and repay that debt early. The other recommendation that we are making within this budget is the general fund is going to be about in a positive $12.5 million at the end of this coming year because of the strong revenue growth that we've seen, that we're recommending transferring that additional $12.5 million to capital during this year so that we can, in essence, pay-go or issue no new bond issuances for a lot of the capital projects that we're doing this year. So we would be pay-going those capital items instead of the planned debt issuance. So those are the two kind of recommendations the staff is making based off those 23 numbers, and obviously we'll take some kind of comments on that and discussion on that when we get through the presentation. In terms of revenue recovery, every year I think I'm going to have to come in here and have a slightly different story in terms of a revenue, us really pulling back on revenues. But I'm happy to report that, as you can see on the screen, that revenue growth has continued to stay strong. We still are seeing a tremendous amount of real estate transactions, and that's why we have a 36% increase in our real estate transfer tax. Our home rule sales tax is up 12%, which is showing still strong consumer behavior. Same with hotel and restaurant taxes at 16% and 14% for this year. We are on pace in our hotel, restaurant, and amusement tax number to be close to $12 million, which going back through time, it's been a while since we've been at that number, so we're at levels that we haven't seen in quite some time. Sewer and stormwater are down about 1%. That's just some collection, timing, and everything else year over year. Licenses and permits were up 9%. State sales tax up 2%. Income tax were anticipated to be about 16%. And then on the corporate income tax side, we're up about 23% over the budget. That still is a decline year over year of about $8 million. But we still are anticipated to be about 23% higher than budgeted because we were overly conservative in our budget estimate last year because we had anticipated closer to a 35% decline in that funding source. So now looking into the 2024 revenue estimate, there is more red on this chart than there was the last one, but that is because we are anticipating in this budget some level of financial pullback in the economy. Is it going to be a large 5-10% pullback? We don't anticipate it. What we anticipate is more what you're seeing on the sales tax and hotel and restaurant side of around those 3% declines. And that's just basing it off of that's about a middle ground of nothing versus what we saw in an 08 type recession. The city saw about an 8% pullback during an 08 recession. So we kind of hit that middle ground on there. Real estate transfer taxes we do have going down 20%. That is primarily driven because where interest rates are, we do anticipate that eventually that will affect the housing market, will affect housing sales. So we're being conservative on what those transfer taxes look like. The other large area that I will draw attention to is going to be on that corporate income tax side or the PPRT discussion. The state of Illinois uses a relatively convoluted formula to in essence, figure out what proportion of corporate income taxes the municipalities are going to receive. About every year, they do an audit that goes back about 3 years in time to see if that formula held up or not. In essence, in their last review, they gave to the municipalities to the tune of 26%. So what the Illinois Municipal League is anticipating this year is a 26% pullback in the personal property replacement tax, which equates to about a $6 million decline for the city year over year. In the future budgets that's included in this packet, we do have another pullback again for next year. IML's belief is looking at how everything is being structured and the timeline with this, that more than likely there will still be clawbacks, as they're calling it, of PPRT probably through state fiscal year 2027. So it's going to be a revenue source that we continue to see declines in. And I just want to kind of remind council that this is one of our secondary funding sources for things like our police and fire pension funds, as well as our other pension areas. These reductions have actually meant in our budget that after the 2024 fiscal year, we will not have any dollars from personal property replacement tax being placed in the general fund. It all will go towards our pension funds because of that pullback and reduction in those receipts. So just kind of wanted to have that conversation because it's one of the softer state revenues that we're seeing. That it's the one thing that always gives us pause as staff when we're reviewing this of what that might look like over the coming years. I'm not going to go through every single line on this. This is a relatively large chart. What I wanted to just draw everyone's attention to is really this is looking at our projection for 23 as well as our budget for 24. On the operational side on revenues, we're looking at about a 1% increase. And that is primarily, once again, driven by the levy that we place in front of you. Overall, we anticipate a 4.3% increase based off of the levy that we gave you. There's always, when you do a levy, traditionally the city of Peoria collects about 98% of those taxes. So that's why that number is not equal to the 7% that you would think it would be. We are just anticipating that collection of the 98%. So really, those are the two main drivers. You see a lot of declines because of our assumption, once again, on some kind of fiscal correction. So as I said with this, The levy that we have placed in front of you tonight has a 7% gain in assessed values. We are not recommending a rate change. The rate stays the same as it has for the last few years. It's just capturing that additional assessed value. In terms of the stormwater fee, as we have, I believe, since 2021, staff is recommending to suspend the CPI increase for the stormwater fee again for next year. That will potentially, in this budget document, we do anticipate a CPI increase for 2025, but that will be a conversation that we have with council as we come back for the 2025 revised budget. In terms of state and federal and other sources, this is where you are really going to see that impact of what that PPRT clawback means for the city. So overall, on state and federal sources, we're seeing about a 6.22% decline in our revenues year over year. The other area that you will see is in the other sources. This in the 2023 year, this had the $20 million for the Civic Center. Because we don't have that bond issuance, that's why you have that difference of around $22 million year over year. So those are really your big drivers into why you're seeing kind of the state and federal sources have a decline year over year. In terms of expenses, we are looking at a 5.4% increase overall in expenses. This is primarily driven by the large amount of capital that we have in this budget. We are increasing our capital expenditures close to $35 million year over year. So that makes up a large piece of this. A lot of the other pieces on your personnel side, and we'll get into staffing in a second, we're right within line with our union contract increases and just kind of our day-to-day maintenance with those items. In terms of staffing, 2023 overall was plus 25 folks that were approved by City Council. For 2024, the recommendation is to add an additional 13 positions. This would increase staffing up to 690 people. That's an increase of 3.8%. It also includes the assumption of filling the vacant positions that we have in some of our departments like police and our emergency communications center that still have some vacancies that need to be filled. In terms of those 13 positions, those positions are broken down into one additional position for the information systems department. They are looking for a public safety coordinator position. In essence, this position is dedicated to work with police, fire, and the emergency communications center, specifically on their needs, as their needs are somewhat unique to the rest of the city. So this would be an individual dedicated to work with them specifically. In terms of Public Works non-stormwater related, there is a request for a grant coordinator to assist with grant applications as well as processing of grants, as well as a mechanical technician to help maintain the 50 buildings and 250 HVAC systems. On the stormwater side, they are looking to increase with 9 full-time maintenance positions, and this would help to maintain curb and gutter and drainage restoration. So this would put a dedicated curb and gutter crew out on the streets to be doing that work on a day-to-day basis. And then the last position is in community development. They are looking for a building inspector to help with their increased workload of permit applications. Our permit applications are up a lot year over year, and obviously I know Director Doolin is here, and I know could answer questions on that if council has them, but we're seeing a large growth in the number of permit applications that they're reviewing. In terms of the fiscal recovery funds, as I mentioned, we're in the last year of those funds. This is a high-level overview within the budget document itself. It gets a little more broken down into specifically what's in those buckets. But we are anticipating spending and allocating the last $10.3 million. I just want to remind council of what the timeline looks like with ARPA. So we have through the end of 2026 for most of our spending to be completed. We have to obligate all of our funds either in a budget or under contract by the end of 2024 for us to be able to spend those dollars in 25 or 26. So while some of these dollars may trickle into other years, really this year's budget plus next year's budget is really the last opportunity we have to, in essence, make changes to these obligations before we have to spend them in that fashion, and/or we'd have to give the money back to the federal government, which I don't think any of us around here at Horseshoe want to do, but we just need to make sure we're following those timelines, and I wanted to just, we haven't talked about ARPA in about a year or so, so I wanted to just kind of remind council of the timeline of those funds. In terms of grants, we have a number of grants coming in this year. We have Fire Station 16. We have a $5 million grant from the state. That's going to help with the construction of a new station. That will also include a police substation 2, as well as a community center. I realized I misspelled MacArthur. That's my apologies on that. I missed the first A. We have the MacArthur corridor. This is part of the $7 million that we received from the MacArthur corridor. We just have allocated in this year the $4.69 million. We also have the $3.5 million for Wisconsin Avenue, which is the reconstruction of the road from LeClaire to Nebraska. We have street lighting upgrades equal to $3.5 million. That's another state grant. We have $2.4 million for Pioneer Parkway and University. This is a surface transportation block grant. We have $2.84 million in police grants. So as I mentioned earlier, the council approved 2 grants that the police department received for operations, one of them including the co-response model. Those funds, because they were multi-year grants, we're reallocating those funds so that the staff have the ability to use those funds for those purposes this year. So in essence, the numbers balance out on what we're anticipating spending this year versus what's in '24, but we're reallocating those dollars in this year's budget. And like we do in most years, we have our CDBG Community Development Block Grant about $1.9 million. And these numbers are not finalized. We don't find out until about mid-year what our allocations will be. These are the staff's estimates. On the home side, we have about $735,000. On the ESG side, we have about $165,000. In terms of support to other agencies, I wanted to highlight a few of these. So the Convention and Visitors Bureau, we have $542,000. For the Civic Center, we have $1.2 million, and as a reminder, that is the floor that they receive annually under the new HRA agreement we have with them post our debt issuance. So that number could go higher if the HRA dollars are at a higher dollar amount. We have $100,000 for Arts Partners, $100,000 for the Downtown Development Corporation. We have $75,000 for the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. We have $100,000 for Distillery Labs as part of the American Rescue Plan. We have $250,000 as part of our agreement with Springdale Cemetery. We have $278,470, which is a contractual agreement with Peoria County for animal control. And then we have about $1.1 million in TIF subsidies. And those TIF subsidies are based off of the agreements that council has approved to date in any of our TIFs for 2024. In terms of the 2024 Community Investment Plan, as I mentioned, there's $101.4 million in capital improvements. Included in that is 77.8% of that goes towards roads, sewer, sidewalks, and traffic, which means 77.8% of that directly impacts the community. The remaining 22.2% is for things like tools, technology, and facilities, as well as fire trucks and police cars and those things that the staff need to do their job on a daily basis. This is the high-level overview of what that looks like in each of those different categories over the life of the 24 to 28 Community Investment Plan. So as you can see, we reach a high water mark this year at $101 million, and we slowly go down to about $50 million in 2028. These numbers are heavily impacted really by a lot of the state grant dollars and federal grant dollars we're receiving. So these dollars that you're seeing in these years are because of those, and when those dollars are no longer available for those projects, you'll see the decline back to what we've been averaging as a city. I will not necessarily go through all of these. I used to provide you kind of a listing over 500,000. That was going to be too many slides this year because of the number of projects that are in here. but I will kind of keep it to the higher level items. So we have about $8.5 million for the Pioneer Parkway and University intersection, $6.9 million for year 3 of the CSO, $5 million for Fire Station 16, $4.6 million for the Dearborn Drive Green Street, an additional $4.5 million for the Depot Street project, $4.3 million for a radio replacement project that would replace all of the city radios that are out being used by our first responders. We have fire fleet replacement. This was a truck that council approved the purchase of last year, but just because of the 18-month to 24-month lead time on this, we had to have council's approval to do that. So that is included in this budget. And then $3.46 million for Wisconsin Avenue from McClure to Nebraska. We have $3.3 million from Moss Avenue for Western to Sheridan, $2.9 for MacArthur, another $2.8 for fleet recapitalization, so that's the rest of the vehicles outside of our fire fleet. $2.45 million for the outfall repair for the Dry Run Creek, and then $2.3 million for the drainage repair program. 2.2 for stormwater fleet recapitalization, so this is looking at vehicles specifically to help with the stormwater utility. We have $2 million for the MacArthur Highway Business Corridor, and then $1.965 million for the Glen Avenue from War Memorial Drive to University. I'm probably going to stop there because we have another page, but as you can see, we have a number of projects this year, I believe. Overall, within the capital improvement plan that's in front of you, I believe we have 179 projects this year, looking at this year through 2028, so there's a lot of information in there, but there's a lot of projects staff are going to be trying to work their way through in 24. In terms of debt, we do see a debt increase, a payment decrease of $860,000 year over year. That is primarily due to the fact of repayment of some of this debt and the city not issuing any new bonds outside of the low interest IEPA loans that the city is using for the CSO projects. In terms of fund balance, so currently the projected unobligated fund balance in the general fund at the end of 23 will be $57.199 million, or 42.6% of operating expenses. Due to the anticipated growth in pension obligations, staff is recommending allocating excess fund balance to be assigned for future pension payments. We'll get into some of what that math looks like with the pension payments here in a second. But that is the staff's recommendation, is knowing that we have these obligations coming due, that the amount above policy, which is that amount above 25% of operational expenses, be allocated towards future pension obligations. Overall, and this is overall for the entire city, not just the general fund, the city's use of fund balance in 24 is $30.2 million. This is heavily driven in our capital funds, our road funds, and as well as our stormwater funds, as we are working through the cash that we have on hand that was planned for these capital projects. So we're using that cash on hand and reducing our overall fund balance. Our overall fund balance as a city is anticipated to be around $185 million at the end of 23. So we'll be reducing this number down to about $155 million for the city as a whole. As we discussed, public safety pension costs are an item that I know we talk about every year, and we continue to talk about the looming obligations the city has. And just as a reminder, the city's obligations are to be at 90% funded in both our police and fire pension funds by 2040. We currently sit at right around 50% funded in both of our plans, so we have about 40% to go. We still sit at around $400 million in unfunded pension liability that we're going to have to address short of the state making any changes to these requirements by 2040. So what this is attempting to illustrate, and I apologize for the small print, is this is attempting to show over the 5 years of this budget planning that we are anticipated to have those obligations go from $3.13 million in 23 to $39.7 million in 2029. If if you look at that in terms of our overall general fund, that would be as if we were using 22% of our general fund in 2023 towards these obligations, and then by 2029 we'd be at 31%. What I want to also articulate, and it's in your budget book, I do not have a slide for this, is how this is set up is that around 2032, which I know seems sooner than 2040, is when the increases that the city will have to face in terms of these obligations starts to exponentially grow. So this year we're looking at an obligation increase of about $2 million for police and fire pensions. When you get into 2032, we start looking at $3 million a year, all the way up to $8 million a year increases in 2040. This is how the actuaries have set up these calculations, and so it ramps up substantially. So as I said, we are anticipating $33.3 million as our contribution to the pension plans this coming year per the actuaries. Our anticipated contribution in 2040 to make that requirement of the state of Illinois, our pension contribution would need to be $76 million. So I want to just have it on council's radar that we talk about 2040, but really when I look at it, I start seeing an exponential growth around 2032 that will get harder and harder to fill without some kind of changes to revenue, expenses, something from the state, because we were able to find the $2 million this year to fill this gap. When it starts being $3 to $8 million, it gets a lot harder for staff to find that gap. So while it's not on this sheet, just because it would have been, the spreadsheet would have been way too big, it is in the book, it is online, just what that chart looks like year over year. I didn't know if you had something you wanted to add.
I do, and I just wanted to, as we talk about the levy and the growth in assessed values, we're keeping the tax rate constant. And this budget and the 5-year projection of this budget assumes that the tax rate remains the same. But by capturing that revenue growth, that grows over time each year, that helps to contribute towards public safety pensions, because 85% of your levy is going towards public safety pensions. The rest goes to roads or the library, and so that's really where the rest of it goes. So it's really trying to capture that for the out years, because we know that this kind of growth exists.
Just real quickly, I'll go through the last couple slides here. So this is the budget outlook from 23 to 29. So this is, you can kind of see, we are anticipating on the general fund this side this year to have about a $500,000 surplus year over year. Then as you see what happens with our increased contributions to police and fire pensions, as well as some of that reduction in areas like PPRT, as we're not able to have those revenues come in the general fund, but we're also seeing an increase in our transfer needs directly out of the general fund. That revenue and expense split starts to go the other direction, where we're having our expenses be over our revenues, which is not a position that we want to be in the long term. In terms of the general fund, this is looking at the fund balance. So what this slide is attempting to do is look at what our fund balances would be anticipated based off this current spending plan in front of you tonight, what those dollars and cents would look like in 2029, assuming normal growth, assuming the ARPA dollars coming off the books and those kind of areas, that at the end of 2029 the city would have $40.6 million in its general fund. The policy would stipulate that the city should have $31.5 million at that point to be in compliance with that 25% requirement in the general fund. So obviously what you're seeing on this chart is we're seeing those lines getting close to intersecting and going across each other. So what this budget is attempting to do is, by putting these dollars in that reserve for those pension obligations, is providing the city kind of a runway to be able to lead up to some more of these larger cost increases and maintain operations at its current levels without having to do much in terms of expense cuts or major revenue generation. In terms of the timeline, and I will change this now because I know there was some back and forth on the dates. So tonight is the initial review of the biennial budget. The 24th is anticipated to be the budget hearing, and that has been filed, so the hearing will be on the 24th. October 31st will be the next budget discussion. I had it as the second because I know there was some back and forth on it. Then we will have discussions again on the 7th for at the regular meeting for budget discussions. Staff anticipates, obviously depending on council's prerogative, to have an adopted budget on November the 14th that could be filed with the county before Thanksgiving. And with that, that is the presentation that I have. So the city manager and and staff are here if there's any specific questions on the budget.
Thank you for that presentation. I think we'll have quite a few questions. Beginning with Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Minor question compared to the numbers in the budget, but I would like us to get some kind of a report back or discussion on the unemployment rate. I understand, the director here may not have all that information at the moment, but considering we're higher than everybody else and inclining, I think it is incumbent upon us to understand that. Sure. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Councilmember Sear.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I'm going to be all over the place tonight, but first of all, I want to start by congratulating our city manager and also Director Craddy and all our directors. This is a great book that you put together, and it's a great start for discussion. So thank you very much for all the details that are in the budget. Obviously, the section or the part that makes me the happiest is the fact that we won't issue any new debt this year. I've been fighting for this for 6 years now, and finally, it looks like we won't need to issue any new debt or any new bonds. That's great. One of my main concerns, talking to some of my colleague and Director Craddy today, we started 2 years ago with a budget of about $220 million, and we went to $260 million last year. Now we're looking at $321 million, an increase of $100 million in 2 years. I mean, for a small city like Peoria, to me, it's just incredible. Now, some of the words that Director Craddy used tonight, talk about fiscal correction, talks about the budget. I mean, down the road, I don't understand, being a financial advisor in my real job, how we as elected officials, seems like we always want to spend every dime that we make. It's a lot of money, $100 million increase, and we're over $30 million over really the income this year, right? I mean, that's why we're spending down our capital in the emergency fund. But I mean, those are just humongous numbers for me. And it's still fresh in my memory how bad it was a few years ago when we had to cut back on employees for the city, all the different departments. So I hope it does not happen to any of us in the future, but we will have some bad times. We will have a fiscal correction eventually. So we need to be prepared. And I just want to have the discussion. I want to make everybody aware how much spending we have done, increases we have over the last 2 years alone, and we have some new council people around the horseshoe. So believe me, it's very difficult when it's time to cut people their jobs, right? I mean, most of us have been through this, and I see my colleagues shaking their heads. So I want to go on record saying I'm very, very concerned about the speed at which we increase our budget. I'd like to have some report backs. The first one would be the ARPA, Director Craddy. If I can get a detailed bucket, all the funds, where the money is going in the $10 million page, it'd be great. I'd like to get a report back on our debt schedule. You have these graphs, but I'd like to know exactly who do we owe money to, and what is the schedule, the payback schedule is for all these debt. I'd like to report back. I'm really concerned about our budget for the council and for city manager. I'd like to report back on our detail of these, our budget for the city council and the city manager. And I'm concerned, I don't know if we need a report back, but the CSO tranches, okay, we doing $10 million a year, and a few years from now, it'll go up to $12 million for the CSO. I want to remind everybody, this is an 18-year project, right? It's going to cost us anywhere from $150 to $180 million. And my understanding is, and I'm not sure, and I know we had the discussion, but I'm not sure if this council has, or past council has approved having the debt for 18 years in a row, and I'm not sure if we have approved that or not. If it's the case, or just correct me, Mr. Manager, if I have it wrong. But I think we have $10 million for the next 3 years left. I think, and $12 million for the last year. Is that correct?
You've been approving it every year, the issuance of that next year's tranche of spending. And, you know, what we presented to you that council approved us going forward with was that the CSO debt would be issued through sewer funds, and then the maintenance of the CSO infrastructure would be handled through the stormwater utility.
So we will approve it on a yearly basis. Thank you very much for the correction there. And the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is the funding for the due diligence for the water company, if we do it or not, depending on what this body wants to do. Director Craddy, do we have any money aside for the due diligence?
So we did assign, I believe, $500,000 a couple of budget years ago in assigned fund balance for that. There is not the articulation in this budget of spending of those dollars. So if council decided at their meeting on the 24th to do that, we would need to bring forward a motion to amend the budget for those dollars. So like I said, there was the allocation, but it's not articulated as dollars spent in the budget in front of you.
So it'll be brought back on the 24th then? Am I hear this correctly?
If the decision is to go forward, then we would come back with a budget amendment that would increase the spending in the budget to fund the due diligence.
And is to take the vote.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Manager and Mr. Craddy. Thank you.
Welcome. Councilmember Graham?
I'd like to start out with the 2023 budget highlight page. Violence prevention grants. Can you enumerate who's gotten what so far?
Councilman, I don't have that, but I can give. We've sent you a prior report back with who was allocated those, or who was awarded those dollars, and we can get that information in a report back for you, but I don't have it at my fingertips right now.
On the news today, it was talking about $500,000 or so going to a local church for violence prevention.
That was the Cure Violence that was awarded to the health department, and then they in turn put out an RFP for a local nonprofit, and it was the House of Hope that was awarded the Cure Violence for the South Side.
Is there any way the council can be notified about this so that we don't have to learn about it on the news?
Sure, I think we can just ask
Absolutely.
Monica Hendrickson to report back.
We'll give you a complete report back.
And that's with no disparagement on the report, the accuracy of the report, or maybe the merit of the report. But I would like to think that the amount of money that we've been spending for violence prevention, we need to ensure it's being spent wisely. Because I can assure Councilman Sear, all this money that we have now, or have had, because of the federal and state post-pandemic grants and the American Rescue Act, it'll soon dry up. So we're going to want to know what expenditures actually are working to bring violence down. If it's going in the wrong direction, maybe we need to take a look at hard policing, spending more money on hard policing than violence prevention, but we have to give this a chance. I'm disappointed that we're probably not going to see anything happen until January of 24 in terms of violence prevention programs. Is that about accurate, Manager?
That is correct. I think that's when we would start to work on the next tranche of funding that would go out for proposals.
Seems like very, very slow rollout.
I think he's referring to the funding that has already been awarded and when those programs actually get started.
And that we can get a report back on the activities to date from what's been awarded. But we do have that other tranche, and we'll be happy to get the
Mayor's right.
timeline on that as well for you.
That's what I'd be interested in knowing. Also, for me, on the 2024 local sources, dollars in thousands, maybe this is a little bit like Everett Dirksen, but I would prefer not to see these in thousands, but I think we should write out how many million it is. It's hard for me to conceptualize, for example, a projected 2023 property tax levy of $33,347. Why don't we just write out $33,347,000? I mean, I don't deal with this to the degree that some of our experts do in the finance department. So I'd like this to be more readable, not only for me, but I would suspect many of my constituents. Also, we have the staffing. Anybody here from Public Works?
Yes. Director Powers is here.
Sorry, you were hidden behind that lectern. There is hardly a year I've been on the council that I haven't been told that we have a very, very small number of painters. Last I heard, maybe 2. Do we have any money in this budget for people to do things like painting our ornamental light poles? You name it. That may sound like it's not important, but when you have corroding, rusting light poles all over town, it's not optically uplifting. Do we have another position here?
We have not added painters to the.
How many painters do we have for a 50 square mile city?
4. I believe there are 4 obligated actually to paint, but that includes street painting that runs the painting truck. So we have that number committed to painting overall within the city. So that would their primary role is to maintain the streets, the street markings, and those things. When that's not being done, then they're painting in other areas.
Well, I think your primary role is to not only maintain the stripes on the streets, but also prevent our street light poles from rusting out and corroding and looking like hell.
That is correct, sir. And when they're not on the street, that's what they will be doing. In fact, we've committed to doing those as soon as they finish this year.
So no recommendation to enhance for a 50 square mile city the number of painters from 4 to some more realistic number to really take care of it?
No, sir. There are not in this budget. There is no increase proposed for painters.
This kind of reminds me of the answer I got about bulbs from IDOT as to when we were going to get bulbs for our overpass lighting and for the underpass areas in our downtown. It's not acceptable to me that we have only enough money here for 4 painters. I'm not going to vote for the budget unless that's increased, because that cuts right to things that I see every day, my constituents see every day. It's a big deal to me, and we need to be more optically centered as a city. If we have an ugly city, if we're also not taking care, maintaining our light fixtures, it's going to cost our taxpayers more. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, what's another 2, 3, or 4 more painters to actually keep up with things? The other thing that I see here is information systems, a public safety coordinator to assist public safety departments with unique IT needs. What does that mean? Thank you, Director. What does that mean by unique IT needs?
So the infrastructure that police and fire and ECC have in terms of their data networks, their technology that they're using, so the body cams, the cameras out in the community, those are slightly different than the normal needs of finance department, community development. And so they're looking for somebody who's going to have that skill set to work specifically with those departments, also knowing that those departments also have a larger demand for services than a lot of the other kind of back of the house functions.
I don't know that I understand that answer. Are there unique public safety concerns like encryption and so on that?
Council Hayes, did you want to step in?
Sure. One of the tasks I have is I've spoken 8 times at the police department regarding the Safety Act.
Yep.
One of the most troubling aspects of the Safety Act is that a lot of the now regulation that affects our law enforcement officers every day is in the criminal code. So when those regulations are violated, our law enforcement officers that are out there trying to do their best could be charged with a crime. With regard to body-worn cameras, there's a ton of regulation now about officers not having their cameras on when they're supposed to be on and not turning them off. And there's also a lot of data recovery with regard to what's being captured on the cameras. With all that peril on our law enforcement officers, I'm kind of surprised that they feel like only one person can do the job of guaranteeing they're not going to unintentionally run afoul of the criminal law because their equipment isn't working properly. And so these technology aspects of these unfunded mandates of things like the Safety Act that are further complicated by potential criminal penalties calls for us to support those personnel that are out there in this kind of fashion. And so I'm very grateful, given that I have to look these officers in the eye and tell them what's coming at them and how narrow the space is that they get to operate in, how their community is supporting them with technology and enough support personnel to keep all that functioning. So this really matters. And I appreciate your inquiry on it because it gives us the opportunity to talk about these very difficult circumstances that our law enforcement personnel are in every day. So I appreciate
Corporation
the question.
Counsel
Thank you.
Kyle Craddy is wise in every manner possible, but the specificity you just provided was what I needed to hear, and I appreciate that very much. On to the Pioneer Parkway University, $2.4 million. Great. I think it's fantastic. What we have here, though, is a listing of what we have control over. It doesn't tell us anything about money for Riverfront Park, money for Main Street, et cetera. These are all off to one side called the State of Illinois, Build Illinois or whatever.
It is still money that has been allocated in the state's budget that hasn't been released yet. So, and we're continuing to work to try and get that released as quickly as possible.
Has the money been released yet for the lighting for neighborhoods? Because
Not yet.
each district got
Roughly about $500,000 of street lighting money. That we did build into the budget. We're anticipating that will get released. We're hopeful that we'll hear that Main Street and Riverfront get released as well. But that, because of the size of those two, we kind of left those off to the side for the time.
Main Street's going to be probably $54 million by now.
Probably by the time we get done. You're right. Absolutely.
Okay, then move on here to Springdale Cemetery. For some odd reason, under support to other agencies, when it was up on the board, it didn't have Springdale Cemetery on my sheet, but it was on the screen. Yeah. Can you tell me again what Springdale Cemetery was?
It's $250,000 for Springdale Cemetery. It's what we anticipate is kind of our annual operating subsidy that we provide over and above what the county and the park district are providing. And you're correct, the handout does not have that. it was an omission that we wanted to make sure got into the packet that will be up on the website. So, but yes, it's 200. We anticipate every year about $250,000 of operating subsidy.
Also, on the stretch of MacArthur Highway from King Drive to Moss, I don't see that as a major capital project in '24. Maybe I need to look in the book a little bit deeper. When is that coming?
It is in the book. If you give me a second, I'll pull it up and tell you which page.
You can just tell me what year.
It's for next year. The plan is to do that. Not only are we planning on doing the stretch of Moss, but doing the stretch of King Drive that connects to Moss from the bridge.
Up to Moss. Okay, I just didn't see it on this. Maybe it's not considered to be a major capital.
I think it's about $600,000, so it wouldn't have been at that threshold.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that. The other thing I don't understand, and Councilmember Riggenbach, drainage improvements under 24 major capital projects. It's Sheridan Road between Northmore and Knoxville. Well, I'm trying to figure out where that is. Sheridan Road between Northmore.
It's the stretch that runs past the traffic,
would be east
the Park District. Yes.
Of Knoxville. I got it. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, on the OEM facility improvements, 3615 North Grandview Drive, what kind of improvements need to be done there, and what demolition and clearance are we talking about there for our emergency services facility? The acronym is OEM, Facility Improvements, 3615 North Grandview Drive.
So this area up on Grandview Drive, what the project would do is to construct a new pre-engineered vehicle storage building for police to store their specialized vehicles and equipment, and as well as to power up and heat the equipment as needed when we need to use that space. So that's the rationale for that. Through the grant funds we've had a lot of specialized equipment, and this would be a place to store it. It's really a secure location right now. This would just be another building we would build on the footprint of the site.
Which one is being demolished? It says demolition and...
So demolition, and those are the demolition dollars that we're using in the neighborhoods to take down properties that are dilapidated.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
That's a different project.
I was merging those two. Sorry, my mistake. Those are my questions for now, and I thank you for the answers. Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome. Thank you. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Craddy or Mr. Manager, before I get to my peroration here, just a couple items of clarification for me. ARPA money. I thought ARPA money totaled $39 million, and now we're talking $45 million.
It was $47 million. We used 10 to cover lost revenue, and then we've been spending the rest down over 3 years, roughly about 14.5 for the last 2 years, and then 10.3 for the final year.
Okay.
But it all rolls up to the $47 million.
That does refresh my memory. Thank you. Okay. We're adding 9 maintenance people for gutters and curbs. I'm sure that's necessary. What are we doing now? Or how many people do we have now doing that? His mic is not on.
Is primary pavement and/or concrete that is not addressed specifically in an area for stormwater. If you look at the summary that I provided in the budget, I actually break this out in much greater detail as to what we're doing this year in adding O&M cost for stormwater in operations and maintenance. Since the inception, I guess I'll just kind of break into this, of the utility and quite frankly the CSO edict that we have, or the mandate that we have, we've been focused upon capital and capital expenditures, and those have gone forward. What we have not done is address the existing infrastructure that's drainage related. Curb and gutter, and we can, as a report back, if you want me to go into that level of detail, throughout the city is deteriorating at a rapid pace. A lot of the curb and gutter are components of street and sidewalk. In other words, there are some gutter that is actually a monolithic pour, a single pour, that is sidewalk related, and then of course there's a destructive cut that takes place anytime that you address curb and gutter repair. So you're actually getting into 4 up to 6, 7 feet. It could be either side of the gutter. What we're proposing is, because of the additional infrastructure being added to the inventory, and because of the drainage issues that are throughout the city that are associated along roadways or sidewalks, which are curb and gutter themselves, you see them deteriorating, is adding a crew specific to repairing 1 mile or 5,000 linear feet, close to 1 mile, approximately 1 mile of curb and gutter every year throughout the city. And then we've also added a specific road crew that will work in conjunction with that curb and gutter crew to restore drainage related pavement. That's where you see the cracking and so on next to the flag or the pan, the gutter, if you will, of the curb. And they will be restoring close to 2 miles of pavement that is adjacent to gutter. So it's not just the curb and gutter crew, it's actually curb and gutter. It's a mile of curb and gutter that you will see each year will commit to that, and 2 miles of pavement associated with drainage.
And this is something that we're not doing at all now, or?
We are simply not staffed at a level to do that. And again, keep in mind that now with a 1-inch rainfall, we are triggered to go out and inspect all of the new infrastructure we're putting in place. So we're adding drainage infrastructure annually. With the CSO project, every year there are new inlets. There's new areas that need to be maintained. We've never until this year addressed operations and maintenance for those additional assets, nor have we addressed curb and gutter specifically, and the utility, keeping in mind that it's a fee. We are very careful about how we report the use of those funds for this crew. So this will address specifically operations and maintenance for stormwater or drainage related issues. To include the street though, again, so I want to be clear that there is a component of road repair that we believe the utility is obligated to repair, because if you look at surface or asphalt surface, they go to the curb and they're often destroyed as a result of us trying to repair the gutter. It's just like a utility, or it's a utility is the bottom line. If we remove gutter, we are going to destroy the pavement. We need to basically restore it. So, and the same would be true with sidewalk. So we think the downstream, no pun intended, effect of addressing curb and gutter issues is on either side of that repair. We will also be making repairs in sidewalks and street. Hence, we're adding the crew, a street crew and a curb and gutter crew.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just also in our staffing budget, we have, I think, which I forget the slide here, but it was speaking about the police and saying we had approved the police budget. Now we need, now we need more people or something. We're still below what we approved, right?
That is correct.
And do you know how far below right now?
I know Chief Dixon is here. He would probably be the better person to be able to answer that question.
I don't want to belabor it. Okay.
Good evening. I think the question is our current staffing level for commission personnel. We're at 214
versus
with an authorized
authorized.
strength of 222.
We're at 222,
Oh, we currently have 214.
214 out of
So
242.
we're 8 under our authorized strength.
Okay. Oh, okay, 222. Okay, and, all right, and when we have our base number, is our base number what we have now, or is our base number what is currently authorized?
It's the authorized positions.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief. I have some, our pension obligations, if we add $1 to what we do this year in pensions, that will save us more than $1 ultimately. Is that correct?
No. And I think part of the reason is we're going to have that pension obligation, and then you have the pension boards, and both at the local and state level, that invest those dollars. And if the market does poorly, you're going to have to make that up.
I'm sorry. I wasn't speaking of that. I understand that that is so. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is in a flat, let's say a flat investment return over the next, however many years till 2040. If we put an extra $1 in today, it's going to save us more than $1 in the long run. Is that correct?
I don't think that we would be in agreement with that statement. I think that one of the challenges is that there are so many factors and variables. There's the salaries that are paid to the officers. There is the unfunded liabilities that are based every year and recalculated and have been growing, actually, in terms of what, even though we've been contributing more every year towards that. We've accelerated our payments and are now levying. These budgets anticipate pension contributions at the levels that have been requested by both the police pension board and the fire pension board. So there's no difference between what they're asking for and what we're funding. So we've moved to that level, but we're still going to have to, as the ramp I think is on page 49 in your book shows, we're still going to have to get up to $76 million by 2039.
But we will, all things being equal, okay, we will make a return on that extra $1 that we put in this year, and it will grow by 2040 to $1.50 or something, which means that we save 50 cents out there by putting in an extra $1 now. All those other things are going to happen, and there's no way to predict them. I'm just speaking about
the only
half.
Yeah, the only difference, the only way you could really do that, I mean, you'd have to take probably more. The policy question would be to take more of the reserves out today, and put that away, with give that to the pension boards and say, here, put this in and invest these dollars, and do that. But again, the variable is you don't control that investment, and that investment in last year both funds lost $25 million because the market didn't perform at a level. And that has to be made up over the next 5 years, and that gets kind of smoothed into the average of what the payments are. But that's why this year alone, our contributions without front-loading any more money still went up $2 million.
Well, I'm aware that things went down, which makes me think now's the time to put more in. Could we get a little feedback on that, Director Craddy?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you. And then I'd ask us to look at page 36 in the pension book. in the paragraph below, one headed federal sources. It reads, the robust revenue growth dating back to 2021 has afforded the city the ability to have a general fund balance over 25% starting in 2022. The growth in revenues ensures that the city has exceeded its fund balance policy and will allow funds to be set aside for future pension growth. We are currently in a very nice financial position. And as we project out into the future, our position gets more and more and more difficult. So policy-wise, and looking back and looking forward, our city is kind of in stasis. Our city's not been growing for quite a long time. Our population is the same as it was 50 years ago. The rest of the country has passed us up. We're now a small city in the United States. But we have today a very nice financial situation. And to invest in more of the same, it seems like we will get the same kind of result we've gotten. We're doing the same things that cities that are dying, especially older northern cities, we're doing the same things that they're doing. With this temporary bump in our financial prospects, it seems to me that it's time to step away from convention and try to do some things that really, really can encourage growth in our city. All we're doing is the same thing we've done, and we do that pretty well, except not well enough. We're not growing. And we talk about our pension obligations, and we talk about whatever it is, $74 million that we're going, will be our last payment. We don't know how we're ever going to do that. I would submit that if we continue the way we just go, it's going to be pretty tough. Is there a way out of this? Well, I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that the thing we ought to really have a look at is real growth. And real growth is accomplished by policies which have been shown to promote growth, even though today they're going to cost money. But we've got some extra money today. If we just sit and continue to do the same things, I don't know. We may be like some of the great, great cities of our country who do what we do. Milwaukee, Detroit, Newark, and whatnot, they're all St. Louis. You know, St. Louis used to be 850,000 people. It's now 350,000 people. You know, those other towns are half or less than half. That disease hasn't quite got us. But I think we ought to take this opportunity and try to move out of the box we're in. I've had some minor ideas, and none of these have to be enacted. But I think we should all think along these lines instead of just saying we're doing a status quo kind of budget. And I do not mean to disparage the excellent work being done on this budget book or I think people in this building do a great job, but I think we need to kind of break out of here. And some of the ideas, some of the rather cheap ideas, can create very nice headlines for Peoria, Illinois. There are no cities around that I'm aware of that don't charge for building permits. That would be a headline. How much money do we make off building permits? Not a whole lot. You know, rental registration fees. Again, it's not huge, but if we got rid of those things, that's that much more money that goes into maintenance in these buildings, and that's what we want. Now, I have my weirdo parking ideas, but there are other ideas. I'm not the only one around this horseshoe with ideas. Let's move out and do some different things and get that have some promise of getting our city being more attractive, not only for outside investors, but investors inside our city. Okay, soliloquy over with. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Jackson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a couple of questions as I've kind of been looking over this here. With regards to staffing, I think it's Public Works Department. You listed that there are going to be 12. And then on the other page it says 13 new positions. Well, I was just kind of curious. None of them seem to deal much with the folks who do a lot of the real, this is real work too, but I'm talking about code enforcement. I'm talking about, issues with the trees and things of that nature. And I know we have cut positions in the last, 5 to 10 years substantially, but it seems like we can never, ever stay ahead or even keep up with the amount of work that I have observed with regards to code enforcement and or public works, or as it relates to tree trimming and things of that nature. What can we do to get more staffing? Because obviously, and I'm not speaking so much of the first district, one of the recommendations that came from the counselors of real estate about a year or so ago was the need for a vibrant code enforcement department. And you all do a wonderful job. Wonderful job. Let me preface my comments by saying that. But I think maybe what we're suffering from as a result of previous cuts, we've got people who are working, and there's just more work than there are employees to handle the workload. And that's just not, as it relates to code enforcement, we can look at everything from grass cutting to keeping our bushes trimmed. I mean, these are basic everyday needs that I see in our community throughout. But I don't see any positions being offered for any jobs offered for any of those positions.
I'd be happy to speak to the actual positions for work. I'll obviously defer to Director Doolin for code enforcement outside of, meaning the actual labor, if you will. The positions we're adding that are related to storm, if you will, drainage, that are going to be doing curb and gutter, keep in mind that in the winter, a lot of those things can't be done, meaning curb and gutter. So we currently fund our forestry section out of stormwater funding. That's exactly what you will see, is when those people are not doing curb and gutter because materials don't cure in the winter and so on, we can trim trees. So we are adding staff, and we are committing the resources from the utility. I mean, that's the key, that if I can, and I'm pitching this hard because it's actually, I pitched this hard to the manager. I would urge you to read my summary regarding stormwater and CSO, because you've talked about it in many ways at a hierarchical level, but very much capital-centric. This is operations and maintenance. So as we look at those impacts on trees and so on, the staff is going to be engaged primarily with the promise to focus on curb and gutter because it's deteriorating. To your very point, infrastructure deteriorating. And where it's drainage related, if we can draw a line to our utility as an entity, keeping in mind that that's what the council created, was a stormwater utility within the department, not just a fund, but also a fund. It's been our challenge to look at operations and maintenance in that entity. And for the first year, this year, we are speaking to your very point, Counselor, that we are stepping up those positions we're adding. When they're not on the street doing curb and gutter, they will be in forestry taking care of those very things that have not been done. And we looked at that will grow. Keep in mind, again, just as was pointed out earlier with the consent decree, as we add drainage infrastructure, I fully expect to come back here and add maintenance staff to the utility with a committed fund, keeping in mind that the Stormwater Utility Fund is there for that reason, and 3% of the fund for drainage relative to the consent decree for operations and maintenance. So doing due diligence on our side, this is the first year that I've actually approached the manager and said, it's time. We've added enough capital, I think, to the point that it's time to step up from an operations and maintenance perspective and spend those dollars toward maintaining the things that you're addressing right now. Beyond that, on code enforcement, I'll step aside and let Director Doolin speak to that point. But does that answer your question about tree trimming, brush trimming? Anything in that area is being funded by stormwater now anyway. That is public property.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I'll address the code enforcement side of things and just kind of staffing it at general. I think it's a difficult question when you ask probably any department head if they have enough staffing for levels. And, we feel that we can live within the means that we have. I think from my tenure at the city, I think in 3 days is 15 years. I've seen the code enforcement levels fluctuate. At one point, we were down to 6 code enforcement inspectors. Going into next year's budget, we're at 12 with the 4 summer temp help. So we're up to about 16 staff members. But code enforcement is a very reactionary tool in what they do. They do a great job. And when you look at the action numbers of how many properties they abate, how many work orders they issue, how many tickets they do, they all do more actions and work than they've ever done before. But unfortunately, neighbors don't respect the neighborhoods they're in. You're seeing a lot of vacant abandoned property, and the work demand is going up. What I will say is that in this specific budget, there are a lot of different programs that are addressing some more of those root causes and actually aiding homeowners. It's one thing for a code inspector to write a house up, but we still have the American Rescue Plan money to actually help them with the repairs. This year and next year, we'll do probably about 95 new roofs throughout the city from the local money we budgeted and the state money we have. And then next year, we actually will have about $2 million for demolition. That'll be the most money we've ever spent on demolition. And I think if you drive in parts of town, you're really starting to see some substantial movement in reducing those properties. So, obviously with the more staff at any department, you can get more work done. But from a specific staffing level to where we're at now versus where we were 7, 8, 9 years ago, we have increased staff, and staff continues to look at ways to improve what they're doing to make long-term change. It's one thing to be able to cut the grass 15 times a year, but if we try to find a solution to where we don't have to cut it every year, whether it's our side lot program, it's getting control of that program, that property, and redeveloping into affordable housing. That's really the long-term goal of what we're trying to accomplish.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I want to applaud specifically the digital budget book that's online via the City of Peoria's website. It's very user-friendly, and so I really appreciate that. I know a lot went to that, uploading everything too, so I want to applaud you all for being innovative in that. Just a couple of clarifying questions that I have for you. First, Director Craddy, can you speak to the debt that we are issuing to the Civic Center, I see to a tune of $7.9 million. For the person that's listening, is that a combination of the previous bonds we issued for the renovations to the Civic Center and then also in conjunction with the new debt issuance that we did with the recent bonds that we gave the Civic Center?
Yeah, so it is in conjunction with both. So I believe before council made the decision to do the $20 million in bonds this year to help with some of the ongoing capital improvements, about $6.5 million of that $7.9 million was initially going strictly to the expansion bonds that were issued back starting, I believe, in 2005. So about $1 million of that is the difference of that new bond issuance for that $20 million in capital improvements.
And when will the previous debt from the original bonds that we issued in 2005, when will that roll off the books?
So those roll off the books starting in 2028. There is some other outstanding items that the Civic Center does owe the city back in some loans that we will recoup in 29. But the primary amount of their debt does roll off and expire at the end of 28.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding our pension funding sources, the manager mentioned, or city manager Eric mentioned earlier, that 85% of the tax levy goes to that. What is the other mechanisms that makes up the other 15% to address that obligation?
So that is just specifically the 85% of the tax levy that we provide goes to it. The breakdown of the revenues that are going towards the pension plan, towards the police and fire pensions, about 15 million of that of the tax levy goes directly towards those sources. There's about $10 million in PPRT that is being allocated towards police and fire pensions, and then this year about another 5-ish million, and my math might be slightly off in my head, that is going from a general fund transfer. So what we are seeing is, and just for example this year, if the levy goes forward as presented, the increase that we're seeing in costs for police and fire pensions is going to be $2 million. We're only really able to articulate about $1.5 million of this levy towards that cost. And as we're seeing PPRT numbers drop, we're having to see that general fund transfer amount go up. And that's really what is going to start causing some of that friction and tension in our operating budget, is as that transfer number continues to grow, we're eating away at some of our day-to-day operations.
Okay. Thank you. And then regarding local sources, and I know that we only have 2 cannabis dispensaries within the city of Peoria, but is the sales tax from the dispensaries, is that being grouped into home rule sales, or where is that being categorized at?
So it is in home rule sales. We still are unable to obviously articulate what that amount is yet until we have the 3rd dispensary or a second owner come into town.
Okay. And then one second, make sure I got everything. And then lastly, Director Craddy, again, appreciate the explanation. And Councilman Sear made a good point when he talked about how the budget has increased since I've been on the council since 2021. And so if you got on the elevator with someone who's listening right now and they said in 30 seconds, can you tell us why did the budget increase from $282 to $321 million? What would you say to that person?
The simplest answer is capital. It's a lot of one-time capital expenses. We're at $101 million in our capital fund this year. Last year we had about $65 million. So what you're actually seeing is our operation budget is actually decreasing slightly while we're actually increasing capital. So it's a lot of those one-time purchases and a lot of it driven by state and federal grant dollars. So what will happen over time is we will start to get back to that normal level of around that 240-ish million as some of these grant dollars come off the books as well as the ARPA dollars come off the books.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, I think that we do need to forecast that external funding will start shrinking at some point. But again, I appreciate the presentation and that explanation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Riggenbach?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The advantage of going late in the order is a lot of your questions have been answered. So Let me just chime in on a couple things, though, if I may yet. Regarding Councilman Graves' request for the breakdown on violence prevention, I know you've provided that multiple times for us, but I think as we go into budget, that's front of mind for a lot of folks, so I would concur that it'll be a useful report back for us to look at. And piggybacking on Councilman Allen and Sear, just doing simple rounding math, capital's about 30% of our budget this year. If it's 100 and the budget's 320. I know, Director Craddy, you weren't here in 2019, but I'm just curious what percent would you say, Mr. Manager, would you know off the top of your head, would you consider a normal percentage for capital to be of the total budget? You know, if you don't know off the top of your head, if you could just look at 2019, you know, pre-COVID.
I think it was probably in the 20% range was where we were looking back in 2019. We can get those numbers and pull that pretty easily for you.
I think that would just be an interesting.
And some of that's going to fluctuate depending on if there was debt that was issued, if there was, you know, so that you had bond proceeds, if there were large capital grants that we received. But roughly that's where it was. I mean, we generally had a capital budget that was in the $20 to $25 million range, right in that area there.
That's what I was thinking, that 20-ish, so thank you. And Director Craddy, all this talk about the budget and the adding additional dollars, could you point us in the budget book where that narrative lies? Just as you know from my emails this afternoon, this book's very intimidating at some level, so.
You're in essence asking about the kind of the revenue levels, the changes, all of that kind of
Yeah, and the additional dollars that could potentially be going to the pension obligation.
Yeah, so absolutely. So what I would say to the community at large when you're reading this book, really pages about 35 through 50 give the very high level overview of all the numbers on the back end. So that kind of starts with the revenue projections and expense projections for this year, ending with the chart on page 49, which gets into the pension obligation discussions, as well as kind of a 5-year general fund projection. So we kind of run the gamut of explaining all of it in the most readable format you can with financial figures, but in a kind of a quick fashion for the person that doesn't want to read the other 400 pages.
It's very readable, and I really appreciate the format. It's just that sometimes I don't remember where I read it, so thank you for indulging me on that. I would also just nitpick a little bit on the support to other agencies, our support to PCAP, Peoria County Animal Protection. I would say that's more of a service they're providing rather than a support to them. So, you know, the dollar amount is something we've all agreed to in the past and is in line with where it's been. But I just think it's a little misnomer to call it support to them. Director Powers, if you wouldn't mind getting up one more time, as we keep talking about your 9 stormwater maintenance workers, my question, you've thoroughly explained what they're going to be doing and why they're doing it. Thank you very much. Do you anticipate that number of workers will increase as more projects are completed?
Not usual for me, but a very short answer is absolutely. It will, because the utility is growing, the need is growing, the consent decree, the infrastructure that has been, if you, again, just simply, now that I've said this to you, you're going to see it just like me. Look at the curb and gutter, look at the things that the utility provides us a tool to address.
I appreciate your saying utility again, because I think that's something we need to get used to. This is not necessarily stormwater consent related. This is stormwater utility, which will be impacting the entire city, correct? These are not
Everything, Counselor, that we're doing within the consent decree will end up being owned by the city as a stormwater asset. the utility will be charged to maintain.
So getting used to that terminology, I think, will be important for all of us.
I love that you said that because that's exactly what I said to the manager. Instead of saying 801, 101, this is a utility. The council, the city of Peoria, created a utility within the Department of Public Works. And just like any other utility, there's a charge, and the primary charge on the faces you see on the day-to-day operations and maintenance, until this year, we have not addressed. So this is just the beginning, I assure you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
That's all I have for now, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Councilmember Vespa?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just briefly, I have a couple questions regarding these projections. I look at it and it says real estate transfer tax revenue is going to be down a lot. I guess that makes sense with the Fed having raised rates so much recently, but I don't understand why HRA taxes are down 3%, sales taxes down 3%, income down, corporate income down. I think you explained that with the personal property replacement tax, but didn't you say that it was we're expecting the economy to grow 0.9%? Are you saying that nationally it's going to grow, but locally it's going to shrink?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that is, the answer is yes, just because we do anticipate that as consumers are spending through, in essence, the dollars they have, and that is what economists are looking at, is consumers are working through their savings right now. So what that's going to mean over time is they're going to have less cash on hand to buy day-to-day items, buy a vehicle, buy whatever it's going to be. So our assumption is, while there might still be some GDP growth globally in the U.S., we believe that there is going to be some minor pullback. This will more than likely potentially be the recession that we see, is a small pullback in consumer spending. And that's what we're reflecting with the 3% pullback.
Okay, so consumer spending is going to obviously take a hit at the HRA taxes there, sales taxes. Okay, all right. I understand where you're coming from then. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome. Councilmember Velpula?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have a question, but I just have an observation that I wanted to share. So I went into the department's page, and I'm very surprised, and one of the most prominent department that needs to be there, where the city has $321 million, and I don't see an economic development department anywhere. We all wanted new companies to come to Peoria. We all wanted new jobs. We wanted economic diversification. And we just had a discussion about the pension obligations, right? So I see that we are going to support a couple of agencies, that is the Downtown Development Corporation and Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. So are these two entities the cheerleaders for Peoria? I don't know. I know Assistant City Manager Kimberly Richardson dons the hat of Economic Development Chair as well. But I don't know if not in this budget, but I don't know when we are going to rebuild our economic development, because I believe that the answer for every question that we have is we don't have a proper cheerleader who can say, get some business to Peoria. And also, just going back to the strategic plan, we said quality of life. How do you really ensure the quality of life, or how do you attract new businesses? Who has that job responsibility to bring that? This is just my observation, but I would really love to know if we have any plans.
So, Councilman, the economic development function in the city is housed in the city manager's office. So the staffing, there's 4 positions that are in our economic development team. That includes our assistant city manager, Kimberly Richardson, and our economic development manager, Debbie Van Sickle, and then we have 2 other employees that are part of that economic development team. So that's part of the city manager's budget. I think Councilman Sear asked for a breakdown of that, so we'll be happy to show you what the economic development budget looks like in terms of those dollar amounts. They manage those ARPA programs that are dedicated for economic development, as well as our revolving loan program, all of our TIF administration, the negotiation of redevelopment agreements that we have with properties inside TIF districts. They're working on all of those, as well as partnering with our partner agencies, the Economic Development Corporation, the Downtown Development Corporation, Greater Peoria, the Greater Peoria initiative that's going on right now, to the Greater Peoria Workforce Alliance, looking at all of those different areas where we can try and figure out how we can attract and grow business within the community.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Yes, thank you for that. We do have a round two coming from council members that we've already heard from, but we're going to do that. I have a few questions before we get to round two. And one of them is actually related to the comments of Councilman Velpula. I know that we have a draft of a strategic plan that we hope to get approved at our next council meeting, and basically our strategic plan was to help inform the budget process so that they are in alignment. And we have these 6 priorities that we've identified. I know that we're still working through some of the outcomes and the measures, but in terms of those priorities, we've pretty much agreed on these are the 6 big priorities. One of those priorities is economic development. And we need to make sure that we're making proper investments in economic development in order to address that priority. And does this budget reflect that? Should we have more funding set aside for economic development? I know we talked about, there's a recommendation here to transfer of general fund overage to capital for 2024 projects. Do those projects reflect economic development? Do they reflect downtown development? That's another priority that we have, is downtown development. So I want to make sure that our funding plans for this next budget are also in alignment with what we say is our priorities, our 6 priorities. And I don't know that it fully does.
Mayor, I do think that this budget does reflect that. For example, the Adams-Jefferson one-way to two-way conversion is a $15 million investment that's coming from a number of different areas that we anticipate over a number of years in this budget. Okay. So that's a major investment. As Councilman Gray had mentioned, we're still working and trying to lobby to get the funds released for the Riverfront Plan, to get the funds released for Main Street, which has a connection into downtown. Process, so. There are, in addition, we're setting aside about $3 million of ARPA funds for economic development that would be specifically targeted at specific areas in order to address, the hospitality industry that has been affected by tourism, by the effects of COVID, to address small business development and trying to ensure that we're supporting those small businesses in the community. So we're trying to layer in those funds where we can in order to provide that investment. And then I think, if we look at the infrastructure component of the strategic plan, this budget has $39 million of drainage work and $29 million of road work that ties directly back into the strategic plan. We're taking another $2 million or $2.9 million of funding for neighborhoods. That includes not only demolitions, but looking at the programs that Director Doolin talked about in order to address quality of life, that we're looking at that within the plan as well. And we've tried to ensure that we have funding for diversity efforts as well that are built into this budget. So we've ensured that the department, it is small, that we have a small department of equal employment opportunity, but that our DEI officer and the management analyst that works for her have some additional funds to work on diversity efforts as well. So starting to kind of drive that forward as much as we can.
Okay.
Connect that and build that overlap in.
Okay. Thank you for that. It was brought up about the difference between the budget that we approved last year, I think was around $280 million. Is that right, Director Craddy?
Yeah, I think it was around about 275.
275, and then we are projecting that that's going to increase to 311 million this year. And the difference is primarily because we made we approved budget modifications because of some grants that came in, some additional funding.
Correct. There was around $8 million in the police grants. We had about $20 million. Because we had to have the revenue in for the Civic Center, we also had the expense out, so there's an additional $20 million. And so we had a lot of those budget adjustments through the year that got us to the numbers that we have at the 311.
Okay. A lot of the increases that we've seen over the past year in particular have been external funding. So I know that the external funding, I call it other people's money, and I love it, is coming from state and federal sources primarily. Some of that is competitive, and some of it's just been allocated, like ARPA money. There's an equation, and every city gets a percentage. So we didn't have to do a lot of work for that. But the competitive funding means that we've had staff that has come together to write grants, to get money for demolition, money for housing, money for funding for a lot of different purposes, right? Correct. Some of the earmark funding from the federal, there was a process that you had to go to work for that money.
That is correct.
So what percentage of the outside money would you say is competitive, and what percentage was just an allocation?
I'd like to give that to you in a report back. That would give us the time to just go through it and examine that to give you a number. I'm not sure I could give you a ballpark figure right now.
Okay.
But I think that we could certainly look and say this was competitive. This was an earmark, and this was money that we actually just got by.
Okay. I mean, I'd really like to know, because I know the staff has been working really hard at trying to bring in external dollars, and we've been fortunate to be able to secure funding because of those extra efforts. And that's where I think a grant writer for Public Works will, expand the ability to continue bringing in the external dollars that we need and not see so much of a decline. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about those two recommendations, Director Craddy. One is to recommend early repayment of debt. And can you talk about that again?
Yeah, absolutely. So the early repayment of the debt, the city had a loan with Peoria County for some intersection work at Willow Knolls. So this debt, the city in essence had been paying interest-only payments until this coming fiscal year. So the payments were going to be about $500,000 a year starting in '24. So what staff reviewed is one area that within our budget that every year we do struggle a little bit with allocations is for our road projects out of local motor fuel tax. And so when we were looking at this budget, we decided that we felt it was prudent to make the recommendation to pay down that debt early so that we could have an additional $500,000 a year at minimum back in that local motor fuel tax fund to continue to do other projects throughout the community.
Okay, and that total amount?
I think it's 1.8 million.
Okay. And of course, we're not there yet. We're just in discussions tonight. But at the point that we want to approve or not, that will be a motion.
That will be
prepared in advance. Okay. And then the transfer of general fund overage to capital.
So we anticipate the general fund to be in about a $12.5 million positive position this coming year. So when we went through the budget process, we wrestled with the idea. We had planned on issuing $10 million in bonds in '24 for facility-related improvements in fire fleet. And so when we looked at the overages, looking also at the fact that the city also was above fund balance policy, the recommendation that we went through was to make that transfer to capital so that we could, in essence, pay in cash instead of taking on additional debt, which where the market is right now, we're going to be paying probably 5.5% to 6% interest to go out and issue bonds. So the recommendation the staff was making was go ahead and use those, the good returns that we have in 23 to fund the capital operation, some of our capital in 24.
And predominantly, what we had anticipated issuing debt for this year was facilities-related work that we had throughout the city. There's a number of, we maintain a lot of square feet of office space. And, that's office space, fire stations, other facilities that we have. And so some of that was looking at that, saying those capital needs, if we could pour that in using these existing dollars, it saves us that debt service in the long term that we would have to pay out of the capital fund. And then in addition, one other big project that we have is the replacement of all of those radios for our first responders. And it's that they have reached their useful life and we need to replace that. And it's a $4.5 million or $4.4 million project is what we're looking at there to replace all the radios for all of our police and fire as well.
And just to clarify with that, because of the useful life on that, that's not bondable. So we have to, in essence, if we want to do the project, we have to pay that with cash because the useful life does not meet, in essence, the life of the bonds, which would be 20 years.
Okay. Last question that I have for now is related to MacArthur Highway. I see certain amounts, but I don't see the 7 million. Is that because some of it's to be spent at another time?
Yeah, so part of it is that it's split between years. So what is articulated in the presentation was the amount that is allocated for 24. So the full 7 million is included in the overall plan. Okay. It's structured in different years. So how the presentation was structured was just looking at 24.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sear.
Okay. Good second round. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple really question and one comment. Mr. Manager, I know we're not issuing bonds, but what is, and I'm talking about depreciation, can you explain to us what Mr. Craddy just said, when we issue bonds, when we had in the past, what was your main reason? Where did you apply that money to?
In prior years, where did we issue bonds for? Well, I just
want to hear about your rules. Usually the depreciation.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's a 20-year debt issuance that we look at for those types of expenses, and most of it is for large ticket items, whether that would be your physical plant buildings that you would be putting it into, roads and sewers. So we're right now with the CSO, we're borrowing through the state's revolving loan fund because we can get it at under 2% interest. So it's cheaper than if we were to just issue that debt on our own. So that's helping us to keep that cost down over time, and that's funding the CSO improvements. So your physical plant, that would be areas where you would issue debt. In some instances, the city has issued debt for economic development projects. There's nothing of that anticipated here, so in this year's budget, so that's where we are.
Is the CSO money available for the next 18 years?
We believe that the state revolving loan fund will be funded and that they will be able to go forward with that and continue to do that, to use that mechanism to pay for those improvements.
At the very low interest
Yes.
rate. Okay. Thank you, sir. Question for Director Craddy. Talk to us a little bit about the interest rate and the revenues we generate this year on $180 million, please, and where are we using that money?
Absolutely. It's a number that we did not anticipate in the budget, admittedly. I think we had an overall budget for interest of about $600,000. We are going to earn close to $7 million in interest this year. Most of our money is being actively managed with interest rates close to 5 to 5.5%, depending on whether it's in money market or U.S. Treasuries. So right now, those funds go back into, if it's dollars in the general fund, it goes back in the general fund for support. If it's part of our TIFs or part of our sewer funds, it's just an additional revenue source back into those individual funds to help support those operations.
Mr. Manager, can you tell us a little bit about the equation, I guess, or the formula that is used for our pension moving forward with Councilman Kelly to his question. Today's dollars, what are the value of today's dollars moving forward for the next 26 years?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do on that is let us work up a report back, and we could put that together for you.
Well, actually, I don't want to give you too much work. What is the rate of return they're using in the formula?
Well, I think, do you remember what the pension boards are using?
Have they changed to 6.75%?
No, they're down from that. I think it's under 6. I just don't remember exactly.
So the answer to Mr. Kelly's question really was that the value of today's dollars would be increased by 6% if that's what they're using.
I think it's 5.75%.
Okay, so it's still the same. They're using a 5.75%, and that's the reason. That's really the answer to, I think, to Councilman Kelly's answer. I'd like to address, and I don't know, I've never done this, and I don't know if it's ever been done, but I love Councilman Allen's question about the elevator and Councilman Valpula. If I could address our friend from the Journal-Star, JJ, for headlines for our budget, because I hate, we'd always, since I've been involved in Peoria, we're always the worst promoters of Peoria. I think the headlines from this budget, we need to talk about the cancer center that we have got to open the doors next year. We need to talk about Carrig company that just announced our last meeting, their international company coming to Peoria. I think we need to talk about Natural Fiber Welding Company that is growing like crazy in Peoria. And we all know about Simulation Center. I mean, and those only 4. I can think of another 10 companies that have started in Peoria. We need to start promoting Peoria and be positive about what's going on. It's not the same old stuff. We're investing $100 million possibly this year in capital investment. We have in the past, since I've been here, we do about 30 to 40 every year. We have a lot of great things happening. And if all the money from the state and the Fed comes to Peoria the next 5 years, Peoria will look different. You know, from Main Street to the Civic Center to the waterfront to Pioneer Parkway. There's so many things that can happen very, very positively the next 5 years if we get that money. We need to start promoting Peoria a little bit. Those are headlines I want to see in the Journal-Star. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Can't agree more. Councilmember Graham.
Well, that's absolutely correct. Some of us were here before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. And believe me, once all these monies are spent, and by the way, people who live in the city of Peoria are taxpayers. We are taxpayers. We're not being given anything. We are getting some of our money back to rebuild our city. Our city will look vastly different when this is done. And all this doom and gloom about how there's no private investment, thank you for mentioning just what was on the docket last time, is to miss the big picture. We all know that there are storm clouds, and we're going to deal with those in the form of our recidivist criminality. But for the most part, our people, I think, are optimistic about our future. And as I take a look at what's happening with our downtown, our uptown, and all the way out to Dunlap, everything in between, I feel very positive about the direction we are going. So I just don't think that we need to feel guilty that we're getting money back that our taxpayers have paid in to the kitty all these many, many years. The whole country benefited by the Infrastructure Act. The entire country did. Mm-hmm. Rebuilding our bridges, our ports, our highways. And it's going to reshape the very face of Peoria. So, yes, there are problems with the pension projections and so on, but I've said it over and over and over again, the problem was not created intrinsic to Peoria. It is a state problem. And they're going to have to step to the plate and do what they need to do to help us as we move down the road in terms of the years to help us and other cities similarly situated meet their pension obligations. But I have people calling me saying, you know, you people down at City Hall are giving away the store. We're giving away the store. I guess when we negotiate contracts as to what we're going to pay our firefighters, our police officers, our public works employees, people in community development, we just pull numbers out of the air as to what we're going to pay them, not based on comparables of other communities. And very often forgetting that many of our employees do not get Social Security except on the strength of some other employment that they've had. So it's always fashionable to beat up on the people who work for government, even our public school teachers. But when you think about it, the elements I just mentioned are the glue of our society. And what we're doing to help rebuild this city in terms of the infrastructure, we're also putting money into our human infrastructure. And that's where our teachers come in. Highly qualified staffs in our schools. Just take 150 alone. Over half of our teachers have master's degrees. That's human infrastructure. So on balance, I'm happy with what I see you brought forward with your staff, Manager Urick. And I think we just need to not project the doom and gloom all the time. Now, I can't tell J.J. Bullock what to write. I can't. Well, I could. Denny Sear just tried to tell him what to write. But in any case, unlike other politicians, I don't think I control the media or should be able to control the media. Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One thing I forgot on clarification. On the various departments, there are line graphs and whatnot, and there's always a big 3-year gray. It says gray in my book, but whatever the color is, it's just one flat line. I do not understand what that means, and it's in all the in every department of the city. It may be something rather simple, and I'm willing to accept that. Or
are you talking about the kind of the gray bar on the mountain charts? Yeah. So what that is just saying, in essence, is these are the 2 years that are being focused on for the budget. So it doesn't actually mean anything with the mountain charts. It's just drawing the eye and attention to those are the 2 years you need to focus on for 24 and 25.
okay, I got it. Thank you. Thank you.
It is the one challenge with the moving from
I-
digital media to the print is it makes more sense on the digital version because it's just trying to draw your attention to it, so it just looks a little weird.
I got you. Thank you. Also, in the departments area, specifically in that perhaps most wonderful department, the city council department, my perennial problem. Around this horseshoe here, we have personnel expense of about $250,000. And so we've got another a little better than $100,000 in other personnel. And I don't know who those people are, or maybe I do, but I don't understand that they are part of the city council. And then there's this contractual number. We budgeted $155,000 for that, and for the proposed budget has $95,000. What is that?
Maybe I can help elaborate. And for those of you with your budget books, that's on page 228 in the budget book. The council budget in 2023 included funds for the youth internship program that the mayor was leading that we had, and we had staff that was assigned to that was in that budget, that was included in the council's budget in 2023. In 2024, we've moved that out. We anticipate state funding of $200,000 for that program. That'll be listed in the manager's budget. So what you have then here now for 2024 is just a reflection of the council's budget. The contractual expenses would be expenses you have for running the operations of the office, as well as our membership in the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Illinois Municipal League. Those are all included in those contractual expenses. And I think Councilman Sear asked for a breakdown of that. We'll be happy to share that with you. We'll pull that all together and explain where those dollars go. The supplies, as you can see, there's $15,000 of supplies. That would be, you have materials that we purchase. We have water that we purchase. There's some snacks that I think people see at their desk that we have. There's other materials that we use to buy some of the supplies for the operations of the. I think we have stationery and other things that we provide as well. So.
Well, that's thanks for that explanation. It just seemed like, what? You know, where's all this money? And I know I didn't have it, so okay, thank you. Just a clarification. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Gordon Young.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This question will probably be for Mr. Manager. I was thinking about or reflecting on the strategic plan, and I like the idea, or you bringing the correlation, Madam Mayor, because I was thinking about that too, and wanting to make sure that we are considering and always keeping in mind those priorities that we established. With that being said, is there any way, or perhaps it's in here somewhere, where we can identify, along with the budget, how those decisions have made that are also aligned with the strategic plan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think what we'd like to do is, I think we can go back and prepare a report back that talks about what some of the proposed spending and how it aligns with the strategic plan, and provide that for you as a report back. But I think there's also, going forward, I think what we'd like to do is make sure that as we bring agenda items forward to the council as well, that we talk about how that's aligned with the strategic plan. So you see that if there are actions that we're asking you to take, that those actions are aligned with the strategic plan.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Great discussion. Any more questions or comments? I also want to commend our staff leadership, our Director Craddy, Mr. Manager. Thank you very much for all your efforts, and the new technology is great. I don't like some of the colors it chooses, like red, but
I can change it.
You can't?
I can.
Oh, you can. Oh. Thank you. Little pet peeve. All right, thank you. Madam Clerk.
We are at citizens' opportunity to address the City Council, and we have not received any cards. We are at executive session.
No exec.
So we are at adjournment.
Moved by Councilman Sear, seconded by Councilmember Euler. Please cast your ballots. Thank you for your service. We're adjourned.
Your ARPA question?
Yeah, I just don't want to.
No, we got it. Yeah, I got you.
Asking the secretary.
Got you. You should go show that to Sear. You got the Blackhawks logo on your shirt.